I'm tall, I'm fat, I'm queer, and I have nothing to wear. Hi, and welcome to episode 26 of the Gamer Crafting Podcast. Today I'm talking about the evolution of personal style and its intersections with size and femininity and the expectations of society. As you can see, this is kind of what I look like on a day-to-day basis. If I'm walking to town to take packages to the post office, if I'm running errands, it's usually this. It's usually jeans, plaid shirt, Doc Martens, dungarees, some variant thereof, a hat if I'm feeling saucy. So I just wanted to talk about a few things before we really dig into this, before we really get started. Number one, I'm speaking only from my own very specific personal experience and viewpoint. I, of course, have privilege. I am solidly plus sized, but I'm on the lower side of plus sized. So if there is a mainstream brand carrying a plus size range, there's probably going to be something that would fit my body. I'm also white and I'm also cisgendered, which means that a lot of the very other specific fat phobia that trans women face, that trans men face, that people of color face, are not necessarily things that I face. So these are my own very specific viewpoints. I'm also somebody who has moderate amounts of cash to spend on things like clothes and yarn and patterns and things that I think kind of help me evolve my own personal style. Number two, I'm not shaming anyone in this podcast for their own sartorial choices. We all have bodies that we need to put clothing on unless you have somehow managed to perfect the art of just being a sentient brain in a jar. If you have, my deepest congratulations to you. May we all ascend to such an ethereal plane. So when I say I'm not shaming people for their sartorial choices, I mean that while there are lots of new up-and-coming ethical fashion brands that are starting to make more changes and impacts within the fashion industry, if we're gonna call it that, and I guess we should, a lot of ethical fashion brands are not size inclusive in any way, shape, or form. I have seen many of these brands that stop at a size like a US 12, which would be a 10 in the UK. And obviously that's excluding huge sweeping swathes of the population. So that's not inclusive. And also ethical brands are frequently very expensive. Sure, it makes sense that a handmade sweater should cost $300, but I don't know many people who have $300 to spend on a handmade jumper, regardless of the quality and ethics and fair trade values that are put into making such a garment. Unfortunately, in the sort of society that we live in, we've all gotten very used to cheap clothing, and now it's not even just being used to cheap clothing, we've kind of been conditioned to expect unrealistic price points of clothing. Also, in my we're not judging anyone here, sometimes you invest quite a lot of time and money and effort and love and passion into a project that you later find is kind of problematic. And you're probably going to see a little bit from me actually later in this podcast. So I just want to say up front, there's no judgment here. The third thing that I want to say before we really get started, I'm really super not interested in your fad diets, in your weight loss shakes, or in your 30-day shred programs. I've tried them all, and the only thing that I shed was my own self-esteem and self-worth and positivity. So if you really feel like you need to drop a comment to tell me that I could lose weight if I just tried harder, I empower you to just not. So basically in today's podcast, I'm going to show you all of the garments that I have ever made. Specifically garments, not accessories, because then we'd be here all day. I'm going to show you specifically all of the garments that I have ever made and not frogged. So you will not see the vest that I made out of James C. Brett wool blend, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, that ended up getting frogged because the sizes weren't graded properly and the cables were uneven. I can't even remember what pattern this was now. But I do remember that I was not, maybe not, my knitting brain wasn't quite developed enough yet to know as I was working that that's what was going to happen. I reckon now if I looked at the pattern and started working on it, I'd be thinking, oh no, like this doesn't seem right, and maybe make my own alterations that could fix it, but I didn't have those skills then. So it's got frogged and the yarn went to somebody else, and that was that. You're also not going to see the cardigan that I made most of and then decided that it really wasn't me. It wasn't my style. I didn't enjoy wearing it. I didn't feel like myself in it. And so I traded a mostly finished cardigan to a friend that I worked with for some yarn that I wanted to finish one of the projects that you're actually going to see in this podcast. You also aren't going to see the cardigan that I lovingly and painstakingly designed, only to realize that it sucked. It was not something that was fit to grace the body of a human, and it's sitting shoved in the bottom of the... Some people have a cupboard of shame for their projects that don't work out. I have sort of a box of shame. It's one of those like IKEA pop-up boxes. It's shoved all the way to the bottom of that at the very back of the closet. Shamed where it should be. I also want to say you'll notice that I'm on my couch again. At least it gives me an excuse to clean off my couch once a week so that an actual human can sit on it. You might be able to see that there's some clutter here. There's a camera bag and a hoodie and some notebooks. There's always some notebooks. And behind me you can see the enormous stack of undyed yarn. That's not even all of it. There's a bunch over there behind the camera, and there's also a bunch on the floor behind the couch that you can't see. That level of stacking, I'd like to tell you, takes an immense amount of Jenga skills attained over a lifetime of being overly competitive with classroom games. Also, I won't be surprised if that whole thing comes tumbling down during this podcast and attempts to bury me in an avalanche of wool. Okay, so this is the first garment that I ever made. I made it 4 or 5 years ago. I can't quite remember. But it's definitely the first garment I ever made. Previous to making this, I didn't really have the money to spend on sweater quantities of yarn. It was right after we came back from Ireland, and Ireland was right after we came back from Canada, so our finances through immigration and just trying to live when you're not allowed to legally work were quite stressed. So this is called the Narragansett, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but it's by Thea Coleman. The sizing listed on Ravelry as of this morning is the bust fits a 32 to 50 inch bust, which is edging towards being a bit more size inclusive, but in my opinion it's not nearly enough to be considered inclusive. The yarn that this is made with is called Drops Nepal. It's an Aran weight, I think it's an Aran weight, an Aran weight blend of merino and alpaca. Because this is the first thing I ever made, and because I can literally feel it digging into my hips right now, it is so freaking tight because I just did a normal cast off instead of doing a stretchier cast off. And I remember when I finished it, I took it to one of the women that I was working with at the time, and she looked at me and she went, "That cast off's gonna be too tight." And I was so like offended that she was criticizing my knitting, and then I went to go try it on and I was like, oh. So this is the first thing that I ever made. I hardly ever wear it. I've discovered that wearing alpaca is not for me. A woman who runs hot kind of most of the time anyway. I break into a sweat if I have a cup of coffee wearing alpaca, unless I'm living in the northern outer reaches of civilization, is perhaps not the best plan for me. As you'll see, even though I always wear a shirt under this, you can't see it, but it's there. Even though I always wear a shirt under this, the armpits of this have felted quite aggressively. I know that that's like kind of gross, but I'm gonna tell you anyway in the interest of full disclosure. So when I made this, I was going through kind of like a big evolution in my head of what I wanted to look like and what I wanted, or how I wanted to kind of show the world who I am. I know that this is something that everyone goes through, and you know, most people, what they wear in high school is not going to be the same thing they wear in college, and again when they're, you know, a fully fledged adult. But I also feel like if you're queer in any way, that journey seems to take a lot longer and have a few more twists and turns in it. So I still really don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, so I made this because I really liked the shaping of it and I really liked the photos of it. I don't really like it for me anymore. I don't like how wide this neck is. Yes, I could wear it with a tank top underneath to have the strap showing, and have done in the past when I've worn it, but I don't like it. I don't like having my shoulders exposed. It feels a little bit too feminine for me now. And so I think the last time I wore this was 2 or 3 years ago. Also the fact that the bottom cast off edge is so freaking tight that it really should be redone. I should really like snip out that that cast off edge, and it really should be redone. And maybe then it would fit a bit better like around the middle, but yeah, it's just not my thing, and so it kind of sits and I don't really know what to do with it because it's not like it's in perfect condition, right? I showed you the felted armpit. It's not really something that I feel comfortable giving to someone else or donating to charity because I feel like that's kind of gross. So I don't really know what to do with this, and but it's not really something that I super love. I guess I could try and reclaim some of the yarn from it, but I don't know. I feel like maybe that's kind of the only option, but it would need a lot of, you know, TLC after being knitted up into a garment for 4 or 5 years, however long it's been. And with that, I am going to show you garment 2. I just wanted to mention the kind of detail I was mentioning on this Narragansett sweater. This is kind of cabley lace thing here down up by the left hip. Okay, so this is the second garment that I ever made myself. I think I finished this about 3 years ago. I'm pretty sure I finished it when I was on a trip to the Isle of Skye with some friends and also my wife. This is an After the Rain, and it's by Heidi Kermeyer. This is the yarn I traded for when I gave away most of a completed cardigan that I decided wasn't my thing. I traded the cardigan for a sweater quantity's worth of yarn, which I felt was a fair trade. So this pattern is, I think, the most size inclusive on this list. In fact, it is the most size inclusive on this list. And the sizing goes from a 32 to a 68-inch bust, which is pretty inclusive. I've seen people of all shapes and sizes in the project section on Ravelry. I definitely knit this. I have no idea what the sizing was at the time I knit it because it was so long ago, if I'm honest with you. The yarn of this sweater is Drops Charisma. You'll notice that I've mentioned Drops for 2 garments now in this podcast. I actually find that Drops is actually quite a good suggestion if you want to start making yourself garments but you can't afford higher priced yarns in sweater quantities. Drops is all natural fibers and they are usually pretty economical, especially if you catch them when they're on sale. I have worn this pretty regularly since I finished it 3 years ago, and it's, as you can see, it's held up pretty well. There's not a lot of pilling. I've not had any issues with the yarn, you know, falling apart or not doing well. I will say that I do hand wash all of my hand knits because I have an anxious personality and I don't want them to get ripped up in a washing machine that has a vendetta. So your mileage may vary, I guess. I've worn this over the last 3 years since I finished it, and it's held up really well. I will say that this sweater was definitely a lesson in swatching, which I still don't do, so maybe that's a lesson not learned, but it's definitely a lesson in fibers. So I'm pretty sure that her original garment is made in a blend of cotton and bamboo, I'm pretty sure, and I have a friend who made this in cotton and bamboo. I made mine. Drops Charisma is 100% wool. 100% wool behaves wildly different than cotton and bamboo, so whereas the sample garment was really kind of floaty and drapey, this is not floaty and drapey, but it is really snuggly and warm, so I don't necessarily regret it, but it was definitely a lesson that I learned and took forward with me moving into other projects for sure. Those of you who are very into the knitting community and know my views on things like anti-racism might be surprised to see me actually even wearing this in a podcast. You'll remember that part at the beginning of the podcast when I said sometimes we invest a lot of time and energy and passion and love and money into a project that we later find out is a bit problematic. Ta-da! It's honestly not my story to tell or my specifics to go into, but suffices to say I don't really feel comfortable wearing this sweater to knitting events. And I made this Sunset Highway a couple of years ago. I think I finished it about a couple of years ago. It's made in my own hand-dyed yarns. The green is called Gamora, the purple is Practical Magic, and the other greens are Yoda and Venusaurus Rex. It's a 4-ply sweater in a larger size, so it took me half my life to make it. It's obviously an exaggeration, but it took me a lot of time to make it. I'm not a fast knitter at all, and this was a huge investment of time and energy for me. And I have to admit it, I don't want to frog it because I spent so much time and energy and effort into making it, and I liked how it fit my body when I was done, and I liked how it made me feel, and I enjoyed that it was my first real colorwork project. I'd done other smaller things, but this was my first larger scale colorwork project that I really had to pay closer attention to floats and really get used to how it feels to carry floats along the back of the garment. If you don't know what I mean this. So I don't want to frog it because it was so much time and effort and energy. I dyed the yarns special for this, and I wound them, and I took a million years knitting the whole thing, but I don't really want to wear it either. It doesn't make me feel great about it. It doesn't make me feel good knowing that at some point I financially supported a designer who later made some really bad decisions and hurt a lot of people with their actions. So I feel kind of weird wearing it even now. And to be honest, I wore it last May when I went to Italy, but that was before I knew any of that. And you know, it got lots of compliments. It's a beautiful design. This designer is known for doing lots of beautiful colorwork designs, but I don't feel like I can, I definitely don't feel like I can wear it to a yarn show where people might potentially read into the actions of me wearing it. But I also don't want to frog it, so maybe it will go and live my Narragansett at the back of the cupboard until I know what to do with it. I feel like that's kind of my only option. I don't really know where to proceed. And again, if you have made patterns from this designer, no, there's no shade coming from me. We all have to deal with these things the best way that we know how, and if you feel uncomfortable, then you're gonna make your own decisions, and if you don't, well, that's something that you'll have to come to terms with for yourself as well. I'm not here to tell you what you can or can't do or should or shouldn't do with jumpers that you made years ago under a good faith that you were supporting someone who wanted to make the community a safer, more pleasant, inclusive place. Okay, so this is my fourth and final garment that I will be showing you in this podcast. This is the Vinterscarf by Carrie Westerman. The sizing on Ravelry as of this morning goes from a 26.5-inch bust to a 50-inch bust, but it's made with quite a lot of positive ease. So you might be able to, I don't know, it's up to you. I'm not here to tell you whether to go buy a pattern or not. So the yarn is, again, my own hand-dyed yarn, and the bright, super bright green is called Ectoplasm, and the darker green is called Lone Dryad. And the TARDIS over here is in Sunken Song, but I only needed like a tiny little bit of that, so I think I'll probably end up making a hat or something with the rest of it. But this little TARDIS addition to the pattern was made by a mutual follower on Instagram called Darcy. She's DMA Wonker, all one word name, on Ravelry. If you're interested, I think she still has the chart up there. This was my very first bottom-up sweater. The other ones that I have done have all been top-down. This was my first bottom-up sweater, and so you sort of start at the bottom and then you knit up to where, like, under the arms, and then you attach the arms and then you do the yoke, so on and so forth. And I enjoyed that because then you're kind of looking forward to the fun colorwork bit the whole time that you're knitting, rather than doing the fun colorwork knit part at the top and then having just miles and miles and miles of plain knitting to go. I made this in, I don't know, it took me much less time than it usually takes me to make garments, and I finished it sort of early to mid-December last year. I think I bought it as soon as the pattern came out. It is in an Aran weight, so it does knit up really nice and fast. Because it is an Aran weight and it's so thick and I tend to run hot, I basically just wore this as a coat the whole festive season last year. Who needs a coat when you have a giant 100% merino wool sweater, right? Bring on the apocalypse, I'm ready. So I made this in a super neon green. As you can see, Carrie's original was in this really classy sort of mustard yellow with white, using sort of small batch, beautifully spun yarns and dyed yarns. And then here I am with my screaming neon festive sweater. So yeah, but I wanted to make myself a Christmas sweater that was natural fibers and that I made myself. There's a lot of sort of fast fashion consumption with regards to Christmas sweaters, festive sweaters this time of year that people wear once to a party, and then either they throw it in the bin or they give it to charity, and charity shops are overrun with, you know, ugly or otherwise festive sweaters. And so I wanted to make myself something myself that I would wear year after year because I made it and I put a lot of effort into it, and so I will damn well keep wearing it. And when I first posted the picture of the finished object last year on Instagram, I posted it kind of posing a little bit sassily for me, and got more than one interesting Instagram DM from people saying, well, you talk about fat positivity like it's a good thing. If you just did XYZ, you could definitely lose weight, and it's just a matter of, you know, input versus output, and you're promoting obesity. And I was just like, get out. Get out of my DMs. Why? I don't understand why people think that plus size people, fat people, however it is that you wish to identify yourself. Personally, I don't think that fat is a bad word, so I tend to use fat. But do people who send these DMs think that I've never seen a mirror? Do they think I've been living in some very secluded cult in the woods that doesn't believe in looking into reflections? Do they think I don't know what I look like, or the fact that I do wear plus sizes? I know what size I buy when I have to go shopping for clothes. But my response to that, sort of those nasty fat shamey DMs, was to then go to a Christmas market with my wife and eat a raclette, which is basically like a baguette with a load of melted cheese, and post a picture like this. So this is definitely my favorite thing that I've made. I love the Positive Ease. It is so comfortable and leaves you with lots of extra room for extra helpings of mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie, because that's what this is all about, right? And it's definitely my favorite thing that I've made for myself, and I wasn't sure how I would feel about something that had Positive Ease. This is one of the most comfortable things I have ever made by far. Like, even just sitting here on this couch, even though it's maybe a little bit too warm in my apartment for this right now, not because we have the heat on, but because there's yarn cooking over yonder there in the studio, also known as the kitchen. Even though it's probably a smidge too warm for me to wear this right now, like, it just feels like a hug. I feel like I've knitted myself a hug. And it's my favorite thing that I've ever made myself. So bring on the Positive Ease yoked sweaters. I'm here for it. Bring them to me in Aran weight, because that's the only way they're ever gonna get done in any sort of feasible time frame. And I love it so much. And I might even take it on the next trip I go on, which might be at the end of the month. Fingers crossed. Anyway, so that's kind of how I feel specifically about this sweater. I posted a bit on Twitter earlier this week about how on Tuesday I had a lot of admin I had to catch up on. The kind where you're chained to your desk and you just have to, just gotta plow through. You know, you've just got to do it. So I sat at my desk all day on Tuesday doing this admin work, and I was listening to a fair few podcasts. Most of them were sort of knitting yarn-based podcasts, but also some sort of, you know, social criticism, etc. podcasts from larger podcasters than me. And you know what? So many of the patterns that I see in yarn podcasts and such, they're not size inclusive at all. They're beautiful patterns. They look beautiful. The patterns, you know, the finished garments are really beautiful, but they stop at, you know, a large or an extra large. And you think, well, you know, I certainly can't wear that. And I'm somebody who has privilege in that I tend to be smaller on top than on bottom. So I have privilege in that even if a pattern isn't necessarily meant to be size inclusive, most times it will probably fit me unless it's really egregiously size not inclusive, or shall we say size exclusionary, I think might be a good way to put it. So the thing is, you know, even if these patterns would fit me, they're not going to fit most people that I care about within the fat positivity community. And I say fat positivity because I feel like body positivity has kind of gotten hijacked by people who are not plus size at all. And like, that's fine. We all need body positivity for sure. I'm not here to debate that. There's also been a lot of toxicity in the body positivity community now that it has kind of been co-opted by people other than fat positivity activists, of saying, oh, well, it's fine if you're fat if you're healthy, or it's fine if you're fat if you're making an effort. And it's like, man, no, it's just fine. Like, stop giving so much of a shit about other people's bodies. Let them live. They know what they look like, and their health is between them and their doctors and nobody else. I guess on more of a personal note, a lot of the popular and or available patterns, they don't really feel like me. They feel, I guess, like the Narragansett. They feel perhaps a little bit too feminine to me. It feels kind of more like a costume for me. So I've seen 1,000,001 beautiful Love Note sweaters by Tin Can Knits, and the design is gorgeous and the people who are making them are gorgeous, and I love the idea of adding in texture with your knitting, but it is not something that I feel like I would enjoy wearing. I think that it would feel strange to me. So as much as I objectively think that the design is really pretty and a really clever use of textured yarn, it's not something I'm gonna make because it doesn't feel like it's for me. Yes, okay, I wore dresses in high school. I wore dresses to prom and homecoming and in a wide number of theatrical productions, and I wore dresses for recitals when I was in college as a voice major, and I wore a dress to my wedding, in fact. But it always kind of felt like I was playing a character. It didn't feel like me. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel like I could be myself. I always felt very self-conscious. I always felt like I was constantly having to just manage what I was wearing. You know, is this shoulder too far down? Is this, you know, is this skirt riding up too far? Is it, you know, does this dress gonna fly up in the wind and show everyone my underwear? Which are things that don't bother some people, and that's great, but it always really bothered me. So with my relative privilege of having, you know, a little bit of money that I can spend for clothes, emphasis on a little bit of money, I tend to try to maybe pay slightly more in the hopes that I will get something that I can wear for longer and that will last longer. But you know what? A lot of times it doesn't matter when you're buying plus size clothing, because shit like this happens. Shit like this happens. I don't know how well you can see that. Let's get a little closer so you can see how bad this really is. Right. You can see just how devastating that is. So I've mentioned it in this podcast and I've mentioned it before. I really like overalls. I'm super amped that this weird 90s fashion trend has come back and made it much easier for me to get my hands on them. They're super great for dyeing yarn and for kind of, you know, doing photography or working in the capacity that I work. That front pocket, it's great. They, you know, they're comfy, they work well. I feel comfortable in them. I feel sort of confident in them. I bought these corduroy dungarees from, I think the brand is called Run and Fly, but I bought it from Thunder Egg in Manchester. I bought them online after some friends were like, Angie, dinosaur dungarees, you need these. And I was like, I do need those. And so I paid a little bit more than I guess I normally would. They're not like expensive, but all of these things are relative, right? 5 years ago, I would not have bought these because I would not have had the money for them. But I was like, okay, I can justify that for some cool, rad dinosaur dungarees. Mind you, I bought the largest size, so these are not very size inclusive at all. So if you're looking at these, really craving them, well, obviously I'm not gonna really recommend them because they lasted for a whole one weekend. one weekend, not even the whole weekend, of me wearing them. I bought these before I went to Worldcon in August, which was in Dublin. I did a podcast on it if you want to know what the hell I'm talking about. And I took these with me to wear, and I didn't really want to pack heavy, so I basically wore these, and I had different shirts that I would change into day on day. And so I went to Worldcon. I think I got there on a Friday, spent all day Saturday at Worldcon, spent all day or half a day on Sunday at Worldcon because my flight was home. My flight home was on Sunday or Saturday. Anyway, the point is I spent a day and a half walking around in these, and I dropped a €1 coin on the ground, and I didn't even do some sort of weird acrobatic anything. I literally bent over to pick up a €1 coin on the ground, and these split from like crotch down to knee. And Lola from Third Vault Yarns was there, and I went over to her and I was like, you don't have like safety pins or something, do you? Because I just had an epic blowout. I don't think that she did have safety pins, so I did an awkward penguin waddle all the way from the convention center that Worldcon was at to the airport, and then onto the plane, and then luckily I had a friend that picked me up at the airport on the other side here in London, so I didn't have to do an awkward penguin waddle onto 3 different trains, and then from the train station home I was able to just awkward penguin waddle through the arrival gates and get into his car. But I felt upset about this, not just because I spent money on something that is now damaged quite aggressively. Like, I'm not saying that they can't be fixed, but I'm not a great seamstress. I can probably reinforce the insides thighs with some denim that I have from old riding jeans that I had when I lived in Texas. And I feel like that might be a good way to save these so that these don't end up, you know, in a landfill or wasted. But I gotta say, I'm bummed because so many people at Worldcon would stop me and say, oh my god, where did you get these from? They're amazing. And I would tell them the brand and tell them where I got them. And now I feel like there's a lot of people that don't know who I am, that aren't gonna watch this podcast because they didn't, you know, they don't know me from Adam really, that they're gonna go and get these and maybe be disappointed in the same way that I was. And that's another huge issue when it comes to just plus size clothing in general. You know, stuff that you purchase, not necessarily stuff that you make. And it's not made well. It's more expensive. The fabrics suck. They're not made well. You have problems like this, you know, blowouts from picking up a coin on the ground, as if I was trying to do cartwheels. Side note, I can't actually do cartwheels. Like I was trying to do crazy cartwheels. And you know what? I feel like dungarees should be allowed. You should be allowed to do cartwheels and dungarees anyway. They should be made for you to do cartwheels because, you know, it just seems like they're a good garment for doing cartwheels in. You don't have to worry about your shirt flying up and over your head and getting you all tangled so that you fall, because it's going to keep it in place. Anyway, that was a weird tangent. So that's another problem, is that if you're having to buy plus size stuff, it's more expensive and the fabric's stuck and it's not made to last. It's not made with the same, you know, care that some other brands are made. And if you're trying to spend more on brands that are gonna last longer, a lot of times they aren't size inclusive. So a lot of outdoors brands that I would like to purchase clothing from, because I know that they would last longer with my thick thighs that save lives, let's say. And you know, I don't really have a problem with my thighs. Like, whatever, they've always been this, you know, rough shape. But I have a problem with the fact that it's almost impossible to buy clothing that fits on them that aren't gonna do this. This is the saddest thing I think that's happened to me sartorially this year. So I'm left sort of wondering, how do I marry together this sort of like butch, in between, not quite femme enough to be one of the cool popular kids aesthetic, with things like jumpers that have foxes wearing glasses on them, which is something that I'm working on, or, you know, shirts with angry unicorns on them, or like other nerdy bullshit. It feels like impossible sometimes to marry these things together, And maybe I'm thinking about it too much, but I guess that's just my own problem to solve. So when I see podcasters and Instagrammers with 20, 30, 100,000 followers with these exquisitely staged photo shoots and gorgeous patterns that are not made for me, and their fans who adore them, and that's fine, you can adore whoever you want. Like the weird, geeky, fat teenager that still lives inside of me kind of feels like the kid sitting alone at the lunch table, you know? When these podcasters and Instagrammers have impeccable style, you know, they're always so serving fresh looks, if you want to say that. They have these beautiful styles that I could only ever hope to emulate, because those brands that they're wearing refuse to cater to me and people who look like me. It feels unfair. You know, how are the rest of us who don't fit into this very narrow idea of what's meant to be acceptable, you know, break out of our sartorially challenged shells to be the stunning badasses that we were always meant to be? When the influencers and the movers and shakers of our yarn community, and they roll our eyes at our request to be more size inclusive, and they say nasty things behind our backs like, well, maybe if she just ate a salad, which is something that's actually been said about me, thanks. How the hell are we supposed to move forward and create a better community, a more inclusive community where people feel welcome? So this next statistic is thanks to Instagram user KTB38, which I came across on Instagram yesterday. And that's that 70% of people don't think that yarn festivals are fat friendly. And that's due to things like indie dyers not having larger sweater quantities of yarn for larger people. I will say that as an indie dyer, I don't know, I don't usually take lots of sweater quantities to yarn shows, so that's something that I can personally definitely improve on. But that was a kind of across the board. It wasn't just that I wasn't taking extra of a sweater quantity, I just wasn't really taking lots of sweater quantities of stuff, full stop. And there was also something I came across on Instagram yesterday from Instagram user, I think Classica CD, about a wish list of, oh, I would love these patterns if they were size inclusive. And there's so many popular patterns on there, then you'd think, well, surely that must be size inclusive, but it's not enough, or it's not good enough. It might be size inclusive for some of us, but not size inclusive for others of us. And I don't want to participate in this kind of dichotomy where some people are deemed acceptable enough to knit this pattern and other people are not. I'm not a garment designer. I suck at it. And to be honest, my efforts are better spent elsewhere, you know, working on like mitts, cowls, hats, accessories, things that I can put nice cutesy little designs or cables on. I'm not very good at designing garments. I have tried in the past and it makes my brain hurt. I'm sure that it's something that I could definitely improve on if I wanted to put the time and effort into it, but I really feel like as difficult as I find it, my efforts are probably better spent elsewhere. None of us can unilaterally fix the problem of size exclusivity in the yarn community or in fashion as a whole. But we can call out fat phobia whenever we see it, and it is every freaking where. And I know that a lot of us know that, and sometimes it's difficult to call somebody out who's, you know, a casual acquaintance or a friend of a friend or your partner's friend. It's difficult to be in those situations and be able to say, hey, that's not okay. It's not acceptable to make fun of somebody for their weight or for their size or what they look like, regardless of who they are as a person. As for my own issues that are perhaps more subjective, the more fashion side of things, I will probably keep making cute yoked sweaters like the Vinterskov, like the For Fox's Sake, which is not finished yet, which is why I didn't show it to you in this podcast. I will probably keep wearing dungarees and hoodies when I'm out and about in plaid shirts, and I will probably keep panicking whenever I get invited to a formal event and end up wearing something that I feel uncomfortable in, because who has 400 pounds plus to spend on a sexy tailored suit that I'll wear maybe once a year and probably size out of anyway, thanks metabolism. So I'm gonna call that good for this podcast. If you like this video, please do like and subscribe. I post videos every every Thursday for the most part, and then every Saturday we do a live stream here on the Gamer Crafting YouTube channel where we play games and we craft and we chat about things like cake and people's dinner. It always comes back to food because people have intense opinions about Jaffa cakes. And I will be here next Thursday, and can I just say that should you think that I should just be trying harder at being skinny, then I will tell you right now, with gumption, that shutting up is 100% free.